Will the Monday night matchup against the Bills live up to the hype as the season defining game for these Atlanta Falcons?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Mazda moving the game forward. Mazda, move and be moved. So, guys, today's episode, we will be talking about one key stat suggesting why the Falcons' ground game may not dominate this Bills matchup like many think. We'll talk, that's also related to, the potential impact of this game for our evaluation of Zac Robinson as a play caller. And there's a lot of hype coming from myself as well about the importance of this game. But, for those of you that don't know who I am none other than your humble host, Aaron Freeman. I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I think each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers, that means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So, as I said, we've been talking up this Bills matchup as an important game, as a season-defining game, as a huge litmus test for the Atlanta Falcons. We talk about it not being a statement game, but we just used another adjective, which is a declarative game, right? The Falcons can make a declaration that they have arrived. Right? I've been pushing that narrative, and everydayers have been buying that narrative. And no doubt, again, this is an important game for the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the best team that they will likely face all season long. And I've had some Locked On Falcons insiders sort of express to me that this game is kind of the defining game in terms of how they feel about the quarterback, how they feel about the head coach. Now, for me, it's not as important when it comes to those two conversations. It is an important conversation for me when it comes to how we talk about this Falcons defense. I'll explain why later. But why isn't necessarily a defining game for me when it comes to Michael Penix Jr. or Raheem Morris? Now, when it comes to Michael Penix, a Locked On Falcons insider said this in the Locked On Falcons Discord this week. He basically, and I want to get his quote right, if Penix can keep pace with Josh Allen the same way that Drake May did, I'll officially become a pumper. May had his quote-unquote arrival game. Now I need to see it from our quarterback, referring to Michael Penix. Now, the reason why I don't agree with this assessment from this insider is this is Michael Penix's 8th start. And, we talked with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio before the season started about how many games does it really take for you to kind of figure out if a quarterback has it or not. And he said roughly 16 starts is usually the minimum number that you need. By the way, that Drake May arrival game was his 17th NFL start. So the math is mathing. And so for me, when we look at Michael Penix in terms of when we should be expecting his arrival game, I don't know if it should be this early at this stage in his career. Now, by the time we get to that week 13 game, that will be his 16th start, I believe. And that's kind of the point in the season where we kind of need this Falcon team to kind of pick up steam, where the last couple of quarterbacks have lost steam after blowing some leads, in the NFC South down the stretch. Now, I don't think we have to worry about blowing an NFC South lead because I don't expect the Falcons to catch the Bucs anytime soon at this point in time. But you kind of need Michael Penix to kind of go in sickle mode at the end of the season for the final, 6 games as opposed to the first 6 games at this point in time. And so now that doesn't mean that if Michael Penix plays well, against the Bills on Monday night, it will absolutely do wonders to how we discuss and view him as a prospect. But we're not at the point, for me at least, where it's the season defining sort of stakes that it is for various other people. Now, when it comes to Raheem Morris, I had another insider say, to again paraphrase what he said, it was the Falcons have extremely favorable circumstances talking about this Bills matchup. They need to perform a certain way for me to have belief in Raheem. I just feel like good coaches find ways to win these games. And what he means by favorable circumstances, to clarify, is that the Falcons are coming off a bye. They're playing at home, and they've had 2 weeks to essentially prep for this Bills team. Now, for me, those are favorable circumstances that, to me, close the gap between the Falcons and Bills, but it doesn't make me go like, oh, the Falcons should win this game, right? There's a reason why they're, I believe, now 3.5 point road underdog or home underdogs against this Bills team. That's basically sports books like FanDuel basically telling us that under, normal circumstances, there's a perceived wide gap between these two teams, right? For those of you that don't understand, like, home teams get 3 points. And so essentially, if this game was being played on a neutral field, the Bills will be favored by a touchdown. And that's not a small line in the NFL, is basically what that's usually these two teams are significantly apart is basically what that means. No. So for me, when it comes to Raheem Morris, if the Falcons can pull off the upset, it will absolutely do wonders to boost Raheem Morris's stock. But we know that the Falcons, are a team that's just as likely to pull off an upset and win a game that they shouldn't win as they are to lose a game that they shouldn't lose, And to me, it's more like when it comes to Raheem Morris, like, it's not just this one game, although, again, we would love to see it. But to me, it's like, okay, well, if you do it this week, then the expectation is you're going to do it, win a tough road game against the 49ers the following week. And then you follow that up with a home win against the Miami Dolphins. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, you put 3 wins together. And now that, to me, now is sort of defining moment for Raheem Morris, where it's like, now this is the expectation moving forward, right? Good coaches can not only win a game, but they can string together multiple wins in games together, is how I would phrase that. So, this game is not, for me, a defining one for the defense, but it is an important one. And that's where, to me, it's when it comes to what we're judging, that's what we're talking about. It's important for the defense because, despite this hot start from this defense, we've seen, Falcons defenses get off to relatively good starts in the first 4 to 6 games of the season, right? We know that that's a general trend in the NFL, where you can, defenses tend to start the season stronger than offenses, and then offenses usually start to catch up when we get to October, right? And then they start taking off, and then defenses kind of fall by the wayside. We've seen that each of the last 2 years. Now, again, how fast a start is relative. Like, this is the fastest start the Falcons have had defensively of those 3 years, but it doesn't mean that a drop-off isn't coming. And, the other issue with this game is I think the Bills are well equipped to kind of exploit a lot of the weaknesses that this defense has shown, right? We've seen 3 areas of concern so far in the first 4 games of the season: the Falcons' inability to stop the run, the Falcons' inability to stop scrambling quarterbacks, and the fact that the Falcons' pass rush takes a significant step back, depending on who you ask and whose metrics you're using. But we talked about this last week on the, in the middle of the week, which is, their pressure rates take a significant step back when they're not facing a backup caliber tackle like they did in the first 2 games compared to the most recent 2 games against Carolina and Washington. And so, like, I don't think this is a game where we're going to learn if this defense is truly good or not, despite maybe some rhetoric you've heard from me in previous episodes. But to me, this is a really important game to see, like, how many of these weaknesses are going to continue to be weaknesses. How many these cracks in the Falcons' armor are they going to be able to fill these cracks, or are they going to continue to be exploited? Right? Because, the thing about this specific matchup is, like, the Bills, like I said, have the ability to kind of exploit all 3 of these weaknesses because they have James Cook, they have Josh Allen, they have one of the better offensive lines in football. Right now, most teams that the Falcons are going to face the rest of the season are not going to be able to check all 3 of those boxes to, in theory, be able to exploit all 3 weaknesses of this Falcons defense. But we will face at least upcoming teams that will check at least 1, maybe even 2 of those boxes in all likelihood. And so if we're sitting here after Monday night still thinking, man, we haven't really solved this problem, that becomes a critical data point for those future matchups. Right now, if we can stop James Cook, right, I'll feel a lot better about this team's ability to stop Jonathan Taylor in a couple of weeks, right? But if we can't stop James Cook, then why should I feel good about their ability to stop Jonathan Taylor, right? If we can't stop Josh Allen from scrambling, does this continue to be an issue that gets exploited by, the Justin Fieldses and the Kyler Murrays and the Drake Mays on the schedule, et cetera, et cetera? And so it's really just a question of, can you solve these problems defensively? If the answer is yes, it becomes a lot easier for me to buy into this defense being significantly different than the previous ones. And that plateau, so to speak, is not necessarily going to come. If they can't solve these problems and they continue to get exploited by this Bills team, it doesn't mean that the Falcons defense isn't bad. It just means they are good, except for if you have X, Y, and Z matchup, right? And what we're talking about. So, I think whether we're talking about the coach, the quarterback, or the defense, to me, this game is an important data point, but it's just another data point, right? It may be the biggest dot on the screen when we talk about the data points, right? On the graph, if that's what you want to visualize it as. And it certainly could be a data point that counts more or has more meaning than other data points that we will learn over the course of the season and have learned already from this team. But I would caution folks, despite that, to not treat this game as kind of the be all end all for everything and anything Atlanta Falcons. It's still just week 6. And I feel like if we're going to have those quote unquote season defining games, they're more likely to happen in December when the season is truly on the line, as opposed to week 6, where it's just like, you win some, you lose some, there's still a lot of football left to be played. And so despite saying all that, I absolutely reserve the right that if the Falcons find a way to dominate the Bills in this matchup, to completely act a fool, rocking the red do-rag on the postgame show, right? But for me, really, I'm kind of going into this game hoping and wanting the Falcons not to just embarrass me. And beyond that, we'll see what it is, but I don't go into it with super high expectations for this team. Now, as we just broke down, this is an important game for the defense. I also think this is an important game for the offense and an important data point for Zac Robinson as a play caller, and we'll break down why as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Today's episode is brought to you by Mizzen in Maine, and I'm sure you've all heard the saying, look good, feel good. I know you certainly heard look good, play good. It's why the Falcons look so good and play so good when they're wearing their throwback uniforms. But for those of us that aren't professional football players, the problem is, most dress clothes only check one of those boxes. They look sharp, but feel stiff, hot, and high maintenance. And that's where Mizzen in Maine comes in. They make classic menswear with performance fabrics. It's effortless to look sharp and feel comfortable, right? Their shirts are stretchy, moisture wicking, wrinkle resistant, and machine washable. So don't have to worry about ironing or dry cleaning. It's the feel of athletic wear, but the look of professional menswear. And right now, Mizzen in Maine is offering our listeners 20% off your first purchase at mizzeninmaine.com with promo code LOCKEDONNFL20. That's Mizzen spelled MIZZENANDMAIN.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL20 for 20% off. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen in Maine stores in select states. And today's episode is also brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and they keep moving the game forward. And this week's moment that moved the game forward, well, we have to look back at a couple of weeks ago, because the Falcons haven't quite played as we sit here today. And so we go back to, again, Bijan Robinson cooking Bobby Wagner. And we hope to see something similar on Monday night when him doing the same to, ye old Shaq Thompson as well. And so if Bijan can do that, that will definitely move the game forward for the Falcons on Monday night. And when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. So the big question is, can the Falcons offense keep pace with this Bills offense? And sort of piggybacking on what our insider said, but he was obviously focusing primarily on Michael Penix versus Josh Allen. Now I'm looking mostly at the offense versus, that Bills offense, right? And while we're hopeful that the Falcons defense will slow the Bills offense down, the reality is it's going to take a lot, right? If the Bills come to play like we expect them to play, right? Since Joe Brady took over as the Bills offensive coordinator midway through the 2023 season, they've averaged 29.7 points per game, right? Which means you're going to have to score 30 plus in order to beat them. And if you're going to do that, a big part of that is going to be your play calling coming from our guy, Zac Robinson. Right. And so, I think Zac did a great job in that Washington game. I think you can argue that Washington game in week 4 for the Falcons was if not the best, certainly in the top 3 or 4 best called games that he's had since his arrival at the beginning of the 2024 season. And the question is, can he put 2 of those types of performances, game plans together, especially going up against a Bills defense that, while by no means a juggernaut, generally plays well against non-elite teams, right? If you look at all the teams that have actually scored 30 plus points against the Bills over the last 3 seasons, it's only happened 6 times. Happened once in 2023. The Eagles did it, right? And that was their last win before their epic collapse at the end of the season, in that season. 2024, it happened 4 times. The Rams did it. The Lions did it. The Ravens did it and the Chiefs did it. Is why you've heard me say, basically, unless you have an elite quarterback like Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, you better have an elite play caller like Sean McVay or Ben Johnson for those other 2 teams. And then this year so far, it's only been the Ravens. Once again, Lamar Jackson. And no offense to Todd Monken. Todd Monken's up there when it comes to, premier play callers, although Cooper Rush is not doing him wonders at this current time. But, if the Falcons are going to be the 7th team to score 30 plus points on this Bills team, I think it's going to come from an exceptionally called game from Zac Robinson. And again, going back to what an insider said, he's had 2 weeks to prep, so it certainly could happen. And then you'll also need to see the quarterback play at a high level, like Michael Penix. And then I think you're going to need the Falcons' big 3 to also play at a high level. And currently that's going to be Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, right? Because we learned on Saturday that Darnell Mooney is out for this game. And we talked about this on the crossover Thursday with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, hoping and wanting this to kind of be the game that the Falcons could finally get the deep ball going. And it feels like it's going to be a lot less likely now if Darnell Mooney's not going to be in this game. And so the question is going to be, can Zac Robinson create those opportunities for the other options? And it's not going to necessarily cause us to redefine him as a one, and now he's one of the best play callers in the NFL with the Todd Monkins and the Ben Johnsons and the Sean McVay based off of this one game. Because again, you need to prove that over multiple games over the course of, hopefully multiple seasons. But it does mean if he can pull that off this week against Buffalo, it does mean that that is a box that he hasn't consistently checked. And so that is a significant box to have him check, right? We know that Drake London is capable of winning downfield, but that's not been his primary role in the Zac Robinson offense, right? Only about 11% of all of Drake London's targets have been deep throws, 20-plus yard throws down the field, which is basically the same percentage as Deebo Samuel, right? Slightly below. Like Drake is 10.8 and Deebo is 11.1. And no one would sit here and be like, oh man, Deebo Samuel, that's a deep threat. He's a burner. He's going to take the top. We got to be real world. We got to adjust our coverages to deal with Deebo Samuel. Again, Deebo's a heck of a wide receiver, just like Drake London. But again, that's illustrating a point where it's that's not been something that Drake London has really majored in, especially this year. Right. And then we look at this season, right? Kyle Pitts is off to as brilliant a start as he's ever had, arguably. But none of those has been because he's been attacking teams vertically, right? He has 0 targets on throws of 20-plus yards so far this year. So either we're going to get one of those guys, or ideally both, going this week in terms of the verticality in the offense, something that hasn't been the usual norm this season and in previous years, or the Falcons are just going to have to win via the short and intermediate passing game if the deep ball isn't there. And we saw them do so against Washington, where that short and intermediate passing game was very effective, mostly because they were getting the ball into the hands of their big 3, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts underneath, right? And until Mooney comes back, those are going to be your big 3. And if you're going to upset the Bills, you're going to need your big 3 to step up. But, this whole talk of not having that vertical passing game goes back to a conversation we were having in the offseason where it's I think defenses are going to be able to take this away, and your ability to win is going to be, can you find answers beyond just pushing the ball down the field? And for the first 3 games of the season, the answers that Zac Robinson found weren't particularly effective, and they were in that week 4 game against Washington. And the question, of course, is, will that continue against the Bills? So, has he now figured out the short passing game? And especially if he can do it against the Bills, the expectation is moving forward is going to be, well, he should be able to do it against anybody if he can do it against the Bills, because the Bills currently are 9th in EPA per play allowed on throws under 15 yards. Right? San Francisco is 10th, by the way. So basically, if you can pull it off this week, the expectation is, okay, well, you should be able to do it against the 49ers, especially now that Fred Warner looks like he's going to be out for the rest of the season. I haven't seen that officially confirmed as of this recording, but I'm sure that news is in the pipeline, if not already out. And so it's basically like if you can pull that off against the Bills and 49ers, the assumption is you'll be able to pull it off pretty much every other game for the rest of the season, because probably no one else is going to be able to have quite the ability to stop you like these next two opponents are going to be. Now, we know a big part of the Falcons' answers to defenses taking away the vertical game has been their running game, right? And I think the expectations are high going into this Monday night game that the Falcons will be able to run the ball effectively against the Bills' run defense, which has been one of the weaker run defenses in the NFL, depending on what metric you look at. But I'm not as convinced as the Bills' run defense being as vulnerable as I think people think in this particular matchup against the Falcons, thanks to one key stat. And we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So when the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House, today's proud sponsor. Order today and see the parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Supply House will save you time on your next project. If you need parts fast, they have next day delivery, and their part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. And it's not just time you save, it's money too. If you join the free Trademaster program today, you can score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. So visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. With the NFL season being here, FanDuel has this can't miss offer for you. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. And like I said, you can use those on bets like the spread, where the Bills are now currently favored by 3.5 points. Right, that line has moved since the beginning of the week in the Falcons' favor. People are feeling pretty optimistic about the Falcons based off of that over at FanDuel. But, if you're not feeling good about the spread and you want to bet, straight up, you got the money line, you got same game parlays where you can bet a little, win a lot. You got player props, all that is available. So what are you waiting for? Go visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. So there was a stat I saw this past week that I told to the Locked On Falcons insiders back on Wednesday. And this is a great opportunity to plug the Locked On Falcons Insider program, which you can find a link to in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons, because they get information days ahead of many of you that are, loyal everydayers of the podcast, right? They got this information on Wednesday, and most of you are getting this information on Monday. But, it's not just, getting those, little nuggets of information, can't do math 4 or 5 days in advance. You also get access to all 22 breakdowns, right? And we did a breakdown of some pass rush stats, coverage stats, right? We did a deep dive on Elijah Wilkinson's pressures allowed. And, we looked at some of the highs and lows of special teams. And, you can get access to all of that for free rather than having to go back and pause your screen to see what was that stat that Aaron just threw up on the screen real quickly, and you pause it, and you can get that for free right now. I'll spend 8 minutes breaking it, 8 to 10 minutes, I believe, breaking it all down for you with those pass rush stats for free if you join the Locked On Falcons Insiders, because you get a 14-day free trial, and then it's $4.99 a month thereafter. So you get access to all that great information. But the stat I shared with the Locked On Falcons Insiders, plugs aside, was that the Bills, when it comes to defending the outside zone run, according to FTN Fantasy, are the 4th best run defense in the NFL at defending outside zone runs based off of success rate allowed. They allow a success rate on outside zone runs of 23.5%. Now, they've given up 188 yards on 34 carries against outside zone. That's averaging 5.5 yards per carry. Now, this to me perfectly illustrates why yards per carry is a flawed stat, because everydayers have heard me talk about this many times before. But yards per carry is not a good measure of rushing efficiency. It's a good measure of rushing explosiveness. Success rate is a much better measure of rushing efficiency, right? Because all yards are not created equal. The example I often use is getting 2 yards on a 3rd and 1 is far more valuable than getting 10 yards on a 3rd and 12. right? And success rate would tell you that, but yards per carry would not. Yards per carry will tell you the opposite, right? And so the Bills' yards per carry allowed on outside zone runs is mostly due to 3 big runs that Derrick Henry had in week 1, right? On those 3 runs, Derrick Henry gained a total of 125 yards, so averaging over 40 yards per carry on those 3 runs. But when you look at the other 31 outside zone runs, according to FT and Fantasy, that have been gone against the Bills defense over the first 5 games of the season, they've only given up 63 yards on those 31 yards, so basically 2 yards per carry. And so essentially, again, illustrating why yards per carry is a flawed stat when it comes to efficiency, basically less than 10% of those runs are skewing the numbers widely to make you perceive that, oh, they're consistently giving up 5.5 yards. And it's like, no, they're giving up 40 yards on 8% of the runs and then giving up less than 2 yards on 92% of the runs, right? That's kind of how it works out. And so, rushing efficiency lessons aside, this matters because the Falcons major in outside zone running, right? It's not to the same degree that it was last year, but it still remains their bread and butter play. And so the question is going to be, can they be more efficient than any other teams in the league when it comes to outside zone run? We'll see. Can they bust off long runs like Derrick Henry and the Ravens did? That's possible, right? But one challenge is going to be Ed Oliver is coming back for this game. He's missed the last 4 games. And one of the reasons why that's meaningful is because the way that you generally stop outside zone runs is by penetrating, and Ed Oliver is a very good penetrator. So, we'll see how well the Falcons can run the ball against the Bills. And again, just because the Bills are effective at stopping outside zone, or generally effective outside of 3 plays, stopping outside zone run doesn't mean they still aren't vulnerable to other runs with their run defense. And you looking up the numbers at ftnfantasy.com, they're 31st in terms of success rate allowed on man or duo concepts, right? They're also pretty weak against counter runs. Now, the Falcons have increased their duo run usage this year relative to last year, but it's not necessarily something that is their bread and butter. When it comes to their efficiency on duo runs, they're about league average. They've also increased their counter runs, although it's like going from 0 to like 3, I believe, that they've run this year. So it's like almost 1 per game so far this year. But it'll be interesting to sort of see if the Falcons more diversify their run scheme, or do they stick with their sort of bread and butter? This is how we're doing it. It's about us. It's not about them. So that's going to be an interesting, strategic aspect of this game of, do the Falcons just stick with their tried and true method of running the football, or do they make adjustments specifically to this Bills matchup that they think they can exploit? And so we'll see on that. So ultimately, again, I think it speaks to the overall picture of this game where, again, I've heard from so many Falcon fans over the last week or so about how they feel like, oh, the Falcons match up really well against the Bills. And a big part of that, I think, is because of the perception of how good the Falcons run game and how poor the Bills run defense is. But we will see on that front, just because of this one specific stat that suggests that maybe the Bills aren't as likely to get exploited via the run as, the numbers at face value would make you believe. But I think ultimately it boils down to, if the Falcons do win this game against this relatively unfavorable matchup, as I've kind of illustrated today, it'll be because they play above themselves, right? This is their normal level, and they either take what they normally do and go above it, or they make adjustments to what they normally do, and they probably still have to go above it. And if they do that, I think they will have a legit chance of winning this game. If they don't, then they'll probably lose this game, and we'll be sitting here on the postcast going, it wasn't as good a favorable matchup as I think a lot of people thought it was at face value. So it's one of the reasons why I'm going into this game with lower expectations. As I said, like, all my expectations are just like, please don't embarrass me on national TV, Falcons. And one of the things you can say about the Raheem Morris regime so far, we'll see if this continues, is that they have not been embarrassing in primetime situations, right? They've lost some games in primetime situations, but they have not generally been embarrassing in those situations. Although, had they blown that game against Desmond Ridder on Monday Night Football last year, that would have been very embarrassing. They tried. They really tried to blow that game. But other than that, they're doing fine. So we will see if the Falcons outperform my expectations. We will see if I am acting a fool on the postcast We will, of course, have a Locked On Falcons rapid reaction about an hour and a half after the game. That first hour after the game, after the final whistle, will be filled with the Locked On Sports Atlanta postcast. Check it out for, I'll be rocking the red do-rag. We'll see if Jarvis, has diversified his do-rag game like the Falcons could be diversifying their run game. So that is all for you, along with Tanisha Batiste. Check it out on Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Falcons, on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, if you want to get the scoop on all the other NFL action that occurred in week 6 weekend, make sure you check out Locked On NFL, 2 shows daily to get you geared up for all of the NFL action regarding the other 31 NFL teams. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every